Ezra Blackwood had been counting days like a man counting his last breaths. 15 years alone in this valley, and today was supposed to change everything. Martha's letter said she'd arrive on the afternoon stage, carrying nothing but a worn suitcase and faith in a man she'd never met. But as Ezra stood on his porch that morning, scanning the horizon for dust clouds, he saw something that made his blood turn cold. They weren't dust clouds from a stagecoach, they were war parties. Hundreds of them, moving like shadows across the ridgelines, flowing down into positions that could only mean one thing. The entire valley was being surrounded. Ezra had fought in enough battles to recognize tactical positioning when he saw it. These weren't random raiders or a hunting party that wandered too far from home. This was deliberate. This was planned. This was war. He counted the smoke signals rising from 4 different peaks. His weathered hands gripped the porch railing as the reality hit him like a physical blow. Every escape route from the valley was being cut off. The narrow pass where the stagecoach would have to enter was certainly watched. The creek bed that led to the trading post 15 miles east was probably already blocked. Even the treacherous mountain trail he'd used only twice in 15 years would be impossible now. Ezra's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. Had someone discovered the silver vein he'd been quietly mining? Had settlers downstream done something stupid to provoke this? Or was this about something deeper? Something that went back to the treaties his government had broken before he'd ever set foot in this valley. The morning sun climbed higher, and with it came the unmistakable sound of hoofbeats. Not the organized thunder of cavalry, but the deliberate, measured approach of warriors who knew they held every advantage. Ezra could make out individual riders now, their faces painted for war, weapons gleaming in the harsh light. They moved with the confidence of men who had already won. His coffee grew cold in his hands as he watched them take their positions. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted him to see. They wanted him to understand exactly how trapped he was. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to grab his rifle and make a break for the mountains. But there was nowhere to go. And even if there was, Martha would be arriving soon, the woman who had written him letters for 6 months, sharing her dreams of a quiet life away from the crowded cities back east. The woman who had trusted him enough to travel 1,000 miles to marry a man she knew only through carefully written words. She would step off that stagecoach expecting to find safety, a new beginning, maybe even love. Instead, she was riding straight into what looked like a massacre waiting to happen. Ezra set down his coffee cup with hands that refused to shake. Even though everything inside him wanted to tremble, he'd survived 15 years in this valley by being smart, by reading situations before they turned deadly. But this situation was unlike anything he'd ever faced. 400 warriors didn't surround a single ranch just to make a point. They surrounded it to end something. The question was what they planned to end, and whether Martha would live to see another sunrise. The stagecoach appeared exactly when it was supposed to, rolling through the valley pass like a death sentence wrapped in worn leather and dusty wood. Ezra watched from his position behind the water trough, his rifle loaded but lowered, as the driver pulled up in front of his ranch completely unaware that hundreds of eyes were tracking his every movement. Martha stepped down from the coach with the careful grace of a woman who had spent 3 weeks bouncing across rough terrain. She was smaller than Ezra had imagined, her dark hair pinned back practically, her dress simple but clean despite the journey. She looked around the valley with what seemed like satisfaction, probably thinking she had found the peaceful life she'd been promised. She had no idea she had just walked into her own grave. The driver unloaded her single trunk and climbed back onto his perch, eager to continue his route. As the stagecoach rolled away, taking with it the last connection to the outside world, Martha turned toward the house with a smile that broke Ezra's heart. She had come here trusting him to keep her safe, and he was about to fail her in the most catastrophic way possible. "Mr. Blackwood," her voice carried clearly across the yard. "I'm Martha Coleman." Ezra forced himself to stand, to walk toward her with measured steps that wouldn't alarm the watching warriors. Every instinct screamed at him to grab her and run for cover, but sudden movements would only trigger the attack sooner. He had to think, had to find some way to protect her without starting a war he couldn't win. "Welcome to the valley, Miss Coleman," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "I hope your journey wasn't too difficult." She laughed, a sound so normal and hopeful that it seemed impossible in this moment. "Nothing I couldn't handle, though I have to admit I'm looking forward to sleeping in a real bed again." She paused, studying his face. "You look worried about something. Is everything all right?" How could he tell her? How could he explain that they were surrounded by enough warriors to wipe out a small town, that her arrival had probably just signed both their death warrants? The truth would panic her, and panic would get them both killed faster. Just the usual concerns of a rancher, he lied, guiding her toward the house while scanning the ridgelines. Weather, livestock, the usual troubles. But Martha was sharper than he'd given her credit for. Her eyes followed his gaze to the hills, and something in her expression shifted. "Those aren't your usual troubles, are they?" she said quietly. "We're being watched." The fact that she had noticed so quickly told Ezra everything he needed to know about Martha Coleman. She wasn't just some sheltered city woman looking for adventure. She had survived something before this, something that had taught her to read danger in the landscape. "How many?" she asked, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Too many," Ezra replied, abandoning any pretense. "And they've been here since dawn." Martha's face went pale, but she didn't scream or faint or do any of the things Ezra had feared. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and asked the one question that mattered most. "What do they want?" That's when the war cry echoed across the valley, high and haunting and filled with a fury that made the very air seem to vibrate. It was answered by another cry from the opposite ridge, then another, until the entire valley rang with the sound of 400 voices raised in unified purpose. Martha's hand found Ezra's arm, her grip tight enough to leave marks. "That doesn't sound like they want to negotiate," she whispered. The cries faded into a silence that was somehow worse than the noise had been. In that silence, Ezra could hear his own heartbeat, Martha's quick breathing, and the distant sound of horses beginning to move. Not approaching yet, but shifting positions, tightening the circle, preparing for whatever came next. "They're not just watching anymore," Ezra said, pulling Martha toward the house. "They're getting ready to act." Inside the cabin, Martha moved with surprising efficiency, checking windows and assessing their situation like someone who understood survival. Ezra watched her examine the thick log walls, the heavy door, the limited sight lines, and realized she was calculating their chances just as coldly as he was. "How long can we hold out?" she asked, running her fingers along the window frame. "Depends on what they want," Ezra replied, loading his spare rifles. "If they want us dead, maybe an hour. If they want something else." He trailed off, because he honestly didn't know what else they could want. That's when the sound came. Not war cries this time, but something worse. The rhythmic beating of drums, echoing off the valley walls in a pattern that seemed designed to crawl under their skin and stay there. It was hypnotic and terrifying, a sound that spoke of ceremonies and rituals and purposes beyond simple warfare. Martha pressed her face to the window. "There's someone coming. Just one rider." Ezra joined her at the window and felt his stomach drop. A single warrior was approaching the house, but this wasn't just any warrior. The man rode with the bearing of absolute authority, his horse painted for war, his own face marked with symbols that meant something significant. Everything about him screamed leadership, power, and most dangerously, purpose. "That's their war chief," Ezra said. "They're sending their best to talk." "That's good, isn't it?" Martha asked. "If they want to talk, maybe we can work something out." Ezra wished he could share her optimism, but he'd seen enough of frontier politics to know better. War chiefs don't come to parley unless they're absolutely certain they'll get what they want. The question is what that is. The warrior stopped 50 yards from the house and dismounted. When he spoke, his voice carried easily across the distance, speaking English with careful precision. "Ezra Blackwood, I am Grey Wolf, war chief of the United Tribes. You will come out. You will bring the woman. We will speak." Martha grabbed Ezra's arm. "Don't go out there. It's obviously a trap." But Ezra was already moving toward the door. "If I don't go, they'll come in. And if they come in, we're both dead for certain." He paused with his hand on the door handle. "Besides, something about this doesn't feel like a simple raid. They could have killed us already if that's what they wanted." "Then what do they want?" "That's what I intend to find out." Ezra stepped outside with his hands visible but his rifle within reach. Grey Wolf stood like a statue, waiting, his dark eyes taking in every detail of Ezra's appearance, his posture, his weapons. When those eyes shifted to the cabin window where Martha's face was visible, something changed in the war chief's expression. "You are the one who has been taking silver from the sacred mountain," Grey Wolf said. It wasn't a question. Ezra felt the ground shift beneath him. This wasn't about territorial disputes or broken treaties. This was about the mine he'd thought was secret, the vein of silver he'd been quietly extracting for 2 years. Somehow, They knew. The mountain provides for all people, Ezra replied carefully. I took only what I needed to survive. Grey Wolf's laugh was sharp and humorless. Survival. Yes, let us speak of survival. The mountain is dying because of what you have taken. Our people are dying because the spirits have turned their faces from us. His voice rose with controlled fury. And today, you bring a woman to witness the price of theft. The war chief raised his hand and the drumming stopped abruptly. In the sudden silence, his next words hit like physical blows. You will return what was stolen, or she will pay the debt with her blood. Ezra's mind raced as Grey Wolf's words settled over the valley like a death shroud. The silver mine wasn't just a source of income, it was apparently sacred ground, and he had been desecrating it for 2 years without knowing. But what made his blood run cold wasn't the accusation. It was the impossible nature of what Grey Wolf was demanding. You want me to return the silver, Ezra said slowly. All of it. Every piece, every nugget, every flake of dust. Grey Wolf's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. It must be restored to the mountain, or the spirits will demand blood to balance the scales. That's not possible, Ezra replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. I've sold most of it, used it to buy supplies, equipment to build this life. What I have left wouldn't be 1/10 of what I've taken. Grey Wolf nodded as if he had expected this answer. Then you understand the problem. You have created a debt that cannot be paid with silver alone. Martha appeared in the doorway behind Ezra, despite his earlier instructions to stay inside. Her presence changed the dynamic immediately. Grey Wolf's eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made Ezra's skin crawl. What debt? She asked, her voice surprisingly steady. What exactly are you asking for? I am not asking, Grey Wolf replied. I am telling. The mountain spirits demand restoration. If silver cannot be returned, then life must be given. The woman's life, taken in ceremony, will restore the balance. The casual way he spoke of Martha's death, as if it were a simple transaction, sent rage burning through Ezra's chest. She has nothing to do with this. She just arrived today. She's innocent. Innocence is a luxury your people understand poorly, Grey Wolf said. She chose to join her life to yours. Your debts become her debts. Your sins become her punishment. Martha stepped forward, and Ezra was amazed to see her chin raised in defiance rather than terror. And if I refuse? If I choose to fight rather than be sacrificed for something I had no part in? Grey Wolf smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Then you will die fighting, and the debt will still be paid. The mountain spirits care only that blood is spilled, not how it is spilled. There has to be another way, Ezra said desperately. Something else you want? Land, cattle, supplies. What we want, Grey Wolf interrupted, is for our children to stop dying of the wasting sickness. What we want is for the streams to run clean again instead of carrying the poison your mining has released. What we want is for the deer to return to the sacred valleys your digging has driven them from. His voice rose with each word. Your silver bought you comfort, while it brought us death. The accusation hit Ezra like a physical blow. He had noticed the streams running differently, had seen fewer animals in recent months, but he had attributed it to natural changes, not his mining activities. The possibility that his pursuit of financial security had been killing innocent people made him feel sick. How many? He asked quietly. How many have died? 17 children in the past season alone, Grey Wolf replied. 7 elders, 3 women heavy with child who delivered death instead of life. His eyes burned with grief and fury. Your silver is stained with their blood. Martha's hand found Ezra's arm, her grip tight and trembling. Maybe we can find a different solution, she said. Something that helps your people without requiring anyone else to die. Grey Wolf studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. You would offer to help those you have never met? If children are dying because of something we can fix, then yes. We? Grey Wolf's eyebrows rose. You speak as if his crimes are yours. Martha's voice grew stronger. I came here to build a life with this man. That means his responsibilities become mine, just as you said. But it also means his ability to make things right becomes mine too. The war chief was quiet for so long that Ezra began to wonder if the conversation was over. Around them, the warriors remained motionless, but he could feel their tension, their readiness to act on whatever decision their leader made. Finally, Grey Wolf spoke again. There is perhaps one other way, but it would require a sacrifice greater than death. If you were Ezra, what would you do? Risk everything on an unknown bargain that might save Martha but doom them both. Or refuse to negotiate and fight a battle you cannot win. Tell me in the comments. I need to know which side you'd choose. Because what Grey Wolf proposed next would test the very limits of what a man could bear to lose. Grey Wolf walked closer, his footsteps deliberate and heavy on the hard-packed earth. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press down on everything around them. You have taken from the sacred mountain for 2 years. To restore the balance, you must give the mountain 2 years of your life in return. Ezra felt Martha's grip tighten on his arm. What does that mean exactly? It means you will leave this valley. Forever. You will never touch silver again. Never profit from what the earth provides freely. You will go to our territory and use your knowledge of mining to help us find clean water sources for our dying people. 2 years of labor, with no payment except the food you need to survive. The proposal hit Ezra like a physical blow. Leave everything he had built? Abandon 15 years of work, his cattle, his land, his dreams? And for what? To become an unpaid laborer for the people who were threatening to kill Martha. And if I agree to this, Ezra said carefully, Martha goes free. The woman may choose, Grey Wolf replied, his dark eyes shifting to Martha. She may return east, back to her previous life, or she may wait for you, knowing you will return in 2 years as a man who owns nothing but the clothes on his back. Martha's voice was quiet, but firm. And if he refuses? Then she dies before the sun sets, and he dies knowing her blood is on his hands. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of horses shifting position on the ridgelines above them. Ezra could feel the weight of 400 warriors waiting for his decision, their patience stretched thin as wire. Why? Martha asked suddenly. Why offer this choice at all? You could simply take what you want. Grey Wolf studied her for a long moment. Because I have seen enough death. Because my own daughter was among the 17 children who died, and her spirit whispers to me that revenge without purpose serves no one. His voice cracked slightly. Because perhaps your people and mine can find a way to live without destroying each other. The admission of personal loss changed everything about the war chief's demeanor. This wasn't just about territorial disputes or sacred mountains. This was a father who had watched his child die, and was trying to find meaning in that suffering. Ezra looked at Martha, seeing his own anguish reflected in her eyes. She had traveled 1,000 miles to build a life with him, only to discover that life was built on the graves of children she would never meet. The woman who had stepped off that stagecoach hours ago with hope in her heart was being asked to choose between watching him die or waiting 2 years for a broken man to return. How long do I have to decide? Ezra asked. The sun is already past its peak, Grey Wolf replied. When it touches the western ridge, I will have my answer. Ezra looked up at the sky and felt his heart sink. They had perhaps 3 hours before sunset. 3 hours to decide whether to destroy everything he had built or watch Martha die for his sins. If you're enjoying the story, subscribe to the channel. I need to speak with Martha alone, Ezra said. Grey Wolf nodded and stepped back, but his presence remained like a shadow over everything. As Ezra and Martha walked toward the cabin, she spoke in a voice so low only he could hear. Whatever you're thinking, don't. I didn't come here to watch you sacrifice your entire life for mine. But Ezra was already thinking about the 17 children, about Grey Wolf's daughter, about the poison he had unknowingly released into their world. The choice wasn't really about Martha's life or his freedom. It was about whether he could live with himself if he chose wrong. Inside the cabin, Martha paced like a caged animal, while Ezra sat at his rough wooden table, staring at his hands. These same hands had dug silver from the sacred mountain, had unknowingly poisoned streams and killed children. The weight of that knowledge felt heavier than any rock he had ever moved. You're going to take his deal, Martha said. It wasn't a question. 17 children are dead because of me, Ezra replied without looking up. Grey Wolf's daughter among them. How can I choose my comfort over their lives? Martha stopped pacing and turned to face him. Because those children are already dead, Ezra. Your sacrifice won't bring them back. It will just destroy 2 more lives instead of 1. But it might save the children who are still alive. Or it might not. Martha's voice was sharp with frustration. You don't know that working for them will solve anything. You don't know that the water problems are even fixable. You're gambling everything on the hope that 2 years of unpaid labor will somehow balance scales that might be beyond balancing. Ezra finally looked up at her, seeing the woman he had fallen in love with through letters. The woman who had traveled across a continent to build a life with him. She was right, of course. There were no guarantees that Grey Wolf's plan would work. But there were guarantees about what would happen if he refused. "What would you have me do?" he asked. "Let them kill you to protect my pride. I would have you fight." Martha's eyes blazed with determination. "I would have you make them pay dearly for every inch of this valley. I would have you die as a free man rather than live as a slave. That's not living. That's just choosing how to die." Martha slammed her hand down on the table hard enough to make the water pitcher jump. "Then what kind of life is it when you give up everything that makes you who you are? When you abandon 15 years of work to become someone else's property?" Before Ezra could answer, a new sound drifted through the windows. Not war cries or drumming this time, but something that made both of them freeze. Singing. Dozens of voices joined in a haunting melody that seemed to carry grief and hope in equal measure. "Death song," Ezra said quietly. "They're preparing for whatever comes next." Martha moved to the window and looked out at the warriors positioned around their valley. "How many of them do you think have lost children too?" The question hit Ezra like a physical blow. He had been thinking of Grey Wolf's loss as unique, but of course it wasn't. If 17 children had died, that meant 17 families destroyed, 17 fathers and mothers carrying the same grief that had driven their war chief to surround his valley with 400 warriors. All of them, he realized. That's why there are so many. This isn't about territory or treaties. It's about parents who have nothing left to lose. Martha's reflection in the window glass looked pale and determined. "Then they'll understand what I'm about to ask you to do." Ezra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the approaching evening. "Martha, what are you thinking?" She turned away from the window to face him directly. "I'm thinking that there's a third option Grey Wolf didn't mention. One that might actually solve the problem instead of just postponing it." "What are you talking about?" Martha took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was steady as stone. "I know about mining, Ezra. My father owned 3 mines back east before he lost them to bad debts. I know how to find clean water, how to restore damaged land, how to make poisoned streams run pure again." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "And I know how to do it in months, not years." Ezra felt his world shift again. "You never mentioned that in your letters." "Because I was running from that life. Because I wanted to be someone's wife, not someone's business partner." Her voice grew stronger. "But these children are dying, while we debate honor and sacrifice. If I can save them, then that's what I came here to do." The singing outside grew louder, more intense. Through the window, Ezra could see the sun dropping steadily toward the western ridge. They were running out of time, and Martha was proposing something that might get them both killed in an entirely different way. "You want to offer yourself as the solution instead of me. I want to offer us both as the solution. Together. Not as prisoners or slaves, but as partners working to fix what was broken." Martha's eyes burned with purpose. "But it has to be our choice, not their demand." The singing stopped abruptly, and in the sudden silence, Grey Wolf's voice carried clearly across the valley. "Ezra Blackwood, the sun approaches the ridge. It is time." Ezra and Martha walked out of the cabin together, their hands clasped tightly. Grey Wolf stood exactly where they had left him, but now dozens of other warriors had moved closer, forming a semicircle around the house. Their faces were painted for war, but their eyes held something else entirely: grief, hope, and the desperate exhaustion of parents who had buried too many children. "You have made your choice," Grey Wolf said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "We have," Martha replied before Ezra could speak, "but not the choice you offered." The war chief's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You do not dictate terms to the United Tribes." "Woman." "I'm not dictating terms," Martha said, stepping forward with a courage that took Ezra's breath away. "I'm offering you something better than revenge. I'm offering you solutions." She gestured toward the sacred mountain that loomed above them, its peak catching the last rays of sunlight. "You're right that the mining has poisoned your water and driven away your game. But Ezra isn't the first man to make that mistake, and he won't be the last. Killing us won't teach anyone anything. It won't save the next 17 children who die because their parents don't know how to fix what's been broken." Grey Wolf listened without interrupting, but Ezra could see the tension in the war chief's shoulders, the way his hand rested near his weapon. "I know how to clean poisoned streams," Martha continued. "I know how to restore land that's been damaged by mining. I know how to teach your people, and any settlers who come after, to work with the land instead of against it." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "Give me 6 months, and I'll show you results that 2 years of forced labor never could. And if you fail? Grey Wolf asked quietly. Then you'll have lost 6 months instead of gaining 2 years of slavery, Martha replied. But if I succeed, you'll have something worth more than revenge. You'll have knowledge that can save children who aren't even born yet. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Around them, the warriors waited for their chief's decision, their faces unreadable in the gathering twilight. Ezra found himself holding his breath, watching Grey Wolf's face for any sign of what he was thinking. Finally, the war chief spoke. You would stay here willingly? Work among people who came here ready to kill you? I would stay here as your partner, not your prisoner, Martha said firmly. And yes, I would work among people who are trying to save their children, even if they were ready to kill me to do it. Grey Wolf looked at Ezra. And you? You would accept this woman's offer to share your burden? Ezra thought about the 17 dead children, about Grey Wolf's daughter, about the poison he had unknowingly released into their world. Then he looked at Martha, this remarkable woman who had stepped off a stagecoach into hell and somehow found a way to transform it into hope. I would be honored to share any burden with her, he said quietly, and I would spend the rest of my life working to undo the damage I've done. Grey Wolf was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes moving between them. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of decision that seemed to settle over the entire valley. 6 months, he said, but you will not work alone. My people will watch you, learn from you, judge whether your words match your actions. His expression hardened. And if you fail, if even one more child dies from poisoned water while you work, then your lives are forfeit. The sun touched the western ridge, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. But for the first time since dawn, the light didn't feel like a countdown to death. It felt like the beginning of something new. 3 years later, the streams ran clean again. The sacred mountains' wounds had healed, and children played in valleys where deer had returned to graze. Ezra and Martha's small cabin had grown into a thriving homestead where tribal elders came to learn new techniques for sustainable farming and water management. Grey Wolf's grandson was among the children who now played safely in the restored streams, his laughter echoing off the same ridges where war cries had once promised death. The war chief himself had become not an enemy, but a friend who often shared evening meals with the couple who had chosen partnership over conflict. The silver mine remained sealed, its entrance marked with stones arranged in patterns that honored both the mountain's sacred nature and the children whose deaths had nearly led to war. Ezra never touched silver again, but he had found something far more valuable in the clear water, healthy land, and the trust of people who had every reason to hate him. Martha had found her new beginning, though not the quiet one she had originally sought. Their love had been forged in crisis and tempered by shared purpose, creating something stronger than either had imagined possible. Sometimes the greatest treasures aren't the ones you dig from the ground, but the ones you build with the people who choose to stand beside you when everything seems lost. If you enjoyed the story, consider sending a super chat to help bring more stories like this. Now click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with a twist so powerful it will haunt your thoughts long after the last word. A tale where justice and mercy collide in ways you never expected. Click on the video now.